I know it's not exactly the spooky season, but I really wanted to share this cool little game I found last year. Iru, which roughly translates to They're Here, is a 1998 horror adventure game published by Takara about Japanese high schoolers stuck in school doing preparations for the usual Japanese school festival. I understand it already sounds like a fate worse than death, but don't worry, it gets even worse. Note that I will be showing upscaled emulator footage. I usually have a rule against showing games on an emulator unless I can verify that they run as close to the original hardware as possible, but I will have to make an exception for this one. Let's get to it. But before we experience the joys of Japanese school events, we have to deal with controls. This game doesn't have proper DualShock support, so you cannot control the camera with an analog stick. By default, you control your character with tank controls, while the shoulder buttons are used for strafing and looking up and down. The good news is that you can actually remap all the movement and camera functions, but you still have to choose between tank controls or turning with the shoulder buttons. Thankfully, you'll get enough time to get used to it, and after you do, it becomes a non-issue. The game has a rather slow start, so while we're running errands, let's talk about the presentation. The environments all look pretty good. They are obviously not as detailed as some other PS1 games like Silent Hill or, say, Nightmare Creatures, which is especially noticeable in late game areas, but overall everything looks like what it's supposed to be, which is good enough in my book. However, the character models are different. At the first glance they are hilariously bad. Seams between model parts stick out like sore thumb, and overall they look untextured with painted polygons, except for the students' plaid pants and skirts. The animations are also incredibly simple, robotic even, which makes the characters in motion look like toys or maybe marionettes. This is definitely an unfair comparison, but Resident Evil came out 2 years earlier and their models look way better. But on the other hand, their faces are surprisingly detailed with somewhat well-defined facial features. They even have working mouths. Take that, Dark Souls.
I don't really care.
All the characters look pretty distinct too. Some female students have similar faces, but this is not a problem thanks to their unique hairstyles. So, in a roundabout way, the characters look good-ish? Except for the protagonist who is... I don't want to steal another man's jokes, but...
Nice fucking model!
Oh, but hey, there are working mirrors in this game. Show this to a modern game developer to make them cry like a baby. The sound is pretty unremarkable, which is rather unfortunate for a horror game. The sound effects are serviceable at best, there is no voice acting aside from occasional grunts and screams, and most music tracks are simple generic spooky tunes. I won't say any of it is bad, the sound does its job well enough, just don't expect Akira Yamaoka levels of sound design. During the prologue, you will get to meet all the important characters. They are mostly typical archetypes you'd see in your run-of-the-mill slice-of-life TV series. The kind-hearted but lazy fat guy, a school jerk who is good at second desks, a smart guy with glasses who thinks their teacher is connected to his brother's disappearance because she has his copy of the Vermis Mysteriis, a cute shy girl who has a crush on the main character, you know, the usual stuff. You will have to see quite a few events in the prologue, which does let you get to know these characters better. But once you see all of them, a blackout happens and the real game begins. Gameplay mostly consists of the same thing you usually do in classic survival horror games. Searching for items, to use in a specific place to get other items, to advance the story. There is a noticeable absence of traditional horror game puzzles like inserting the right thing into the right crevice or figuring out which part of human face is represented by what key on the keypad. The game also lacks any sort of combat. Whenever you encounter an enemy in the wild, so to speak, your character has to run and hide. This may sound similar to, say, Outlast or Amnesia, or Clock Tower if you're old, but all these encounters are actually scripted and work like timed puzzles where you need to figure out the correct place to hide before the bad fish gets you. In that sense, the game is actually closer to traditional point-and-click adventure games. You just control the main character and interact with the game world from a first-person perspective. This also extends to other enemy encounters. For example, someone from the biology club left a pet Shoggoth unsupervised and it ate your classmate. You know, it happens. Sure, you can make it go away by giving it a tasty treat, but this won't help when you need an actual magic spell, and figuring that spell out will be a puzzle in itself. You cannot simply use the sheet of paper with the spell, the main character has to know what the spell is and how to use it. And to learn that, you need to find and read specific documents. He even acknowledges when you examine an item after reading about it. The game itself also acknowledges when the player does things in a specific order. For example, After you witness the first death and escape from the murderer, you can be a snitch and tell your teacher, to which she'll respond that you're full of shit. But if you go back to the murder scene first and see that all the traces of the event are gone, the main character will instead ask if anyone saw the characters in question. There are very few moments like this, but it's still nice, and doing certain things in a specific order early on even determines who the final villain will be. That said, the story isn't complex at all, and it's immediately apparent who the bad guys are. But despite that, seeing the events unfold and exploring the school during a blackout is still pretty fun, especially in your first playthrough when the spooky atmosphere holds strongest because you don't know what's going to happen next. There are some minor annoyances, like interacting with something you didn't mean to. I lost count how many times I looked at these notice boards instead of opening a door. If there is nothing interesting on them, then why am I able to interact with them at all? You may also have to do a lot of running around hallways looking for an item you may have missed. But if you don't mind that, this game is worth spending a free evening on. Availability is not really a problem, if you know where to look, and while it never left Japan officially, it has a fan translation, so the language barrier won't stop you either. Thank you for watching, dear viewer. If you liked what you watched, you know what to do. Keep on rocking and I'll see you next time.